June 6, 1944. 6:30 in the morning. A freezing, chaotic stretch of water lies just off Omaha Beach, the gateway to Normandy. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and saltwater. It is filled with the roar of battleships firing into the distant shore. This day is not about the biggest gun or the largest ship. This day is about getting men from the sea onto the land. This is the story of a tiny, 36-foot wooden boat. A young man, a crew member barely old enough to shave, grips the helm of his LCVP, landing craft, vehicle, personnel. They call it the Higgins Boat. His vessel is low in the water. It is heavily burdened with 32 terrified American soldiers. They are pressed together, their faces pale under their heavy helmets. This small craft is the only bridge between the relative safety of the ocean and the deadly German defenses on shore. Imagine this. Just 3 years earlier, the Allies had faced a strategic nightmare. They knew they had to invade Europe. But how, by what means, could any conventional ship drop thousands of men and their heavy equipment directly onto an enemy beach where they would be met by merciless fire? The entire coastline had been turned into a fortress. The entire invasion plan hinged on solving this seemingly impossible logistics puzzle. Ships drawing too much draft would become stuck on sandbars. Soldiers who jumped overboard often drowned under the weight of their gear. Every traditional attempt ended in disaster. The answer did not come from a naval architect. It came from a pragmatic, brilliant shipbuilder from New Orleans, Louisiana, Andrew Higgins. He was an inventor whose ideas were born not on the battlefield, but in the muddy, swampy river floodplains. Now, as the young helmsman approaches the surf, German mortar fire begins to hit the water around him. The noise is deafening, but he keeps his full concentration. He knows his sole duty is to deliver those 32 lives as close to dry land as possible. When the wooden hull finally scrapes the sand, the tension breaks. The moment of truth has arrived. The winch is released, and the steel ramp slams down into the shallow water. It creates an instant, direct exit. The soldiers sprint out, weapons ready, plunging into the surf toward the mainland. They are exposed to enemy fire for only a few vital seconds. This speed saves lives. The Higgins boat did not merely participate in the war. It was the physical tool that translated the industrial might of the Allies into actual invasion. It was the boat that became the answer to the greatest logistical problem of the Second World War. The story of the Higgins boat is the story of one man. His name was Andrew Higgins. He was not a traditional naval engineer. He was a self-made entrepreneur and a brilliant boat builder from the American South. His base of operations was New Orleans, Louisiana. Higgins started his career building sturdy, shallow-draft boats. These boats were designed for the specific environment of the Louisiana bayous and swamps. This region was a complex maze of shallow waterways. It was full of mudflats, submerged logs, and sharp obstacles. The boats he built had to be tough. They had to be maneuverable. Most importantly, they had to be able to run right up onto the soft, muddy shore without damaging their propulsion or getting stuck. Higgins quickly became known for his radical thinking. He dismissed the traditional naval wisdom. Traditional designers believed a boat needed a deep, pointed keel to cut through waves and achieve stability. Higgins proved them wrong. He developed a hull that was almost flat on the bottom. It tapered slightly at the bow. This unique shape allowed the boat to hydroplane. It meant the boat could ride on top of the water at high speed. It could move effectively in water that was only inches deep. When the Second World War began in Europe, the United States Navy was facing a major logistical problem. They were planning for war in the Pacific and in Europe. Both theaters required amphibious landings. They needed a way to get large numbers of men and equipment from a ship offshore directly onto an unsecured beach. Their existing small boats were slow. They were unreliable. They were easily damaged by obstacles and the sand itself. The Navy began looking for alternatives. Andrew Higgins, already building sturdy patrol boats for the Coast Guard, entered the competition. He did not modify a traditional design. He simply offered what he had already perfected in the swamps, a simple, flat-bottomed boat built for abuse and shallow water. When the Navy tested his design, they found it was vastly superior to anything their own engineers had conceived. It was fast. It was resilient. It could literally run ashore, drop its load, and instantly pull itself off the sand. This capability was revolutionary. Andrew Higgins was a difficult and forceful personality. He was famously known for shouting orders and demanding impossible speeds from his workers. But his uncompromising focus on simple, rugged functionality provided the Allies with the perfect tool. That simple boat would soon evolve into the famous LCVP. The design that would win the war had a very humble beginning. It was initially known as the Eureka Boat or the Higgins Boat Model D1. It was not conceived to fight the Japanese Imperial Navy or the German Wehrmacht. It was designed to solve a local, civilian problem in Louisiana. The oil, timber, and fur trapping industries in the state desperately needed a reliable boat. They needed a vessel that could move heavy equipment and personnel through the incredibly difficult terrain of the bayous. These waterways were often too shallow for conventional boats. They were riddled with stumps, sandbars, and mud. The boats of the time were constantly breaking down. Their propellers were being destroyed. Their hulls were being ripped open by hidden logs. Andrew Higgins solved this problem with engineering genius born of practicality. He focused on the boat's rear, or stern. He recessed the propeller. This protected the fragile propeller and rudder from damage. He coupled this with his revolutionary flat-bottom hull. This meant the boat could operate safely in water as shallow as 18 inches. It could even slide over small obstacles. By the late 1930s, the reputation of Higgins boats had spread far beyond the swamps. They were recognized for their ruggedness. They were praised for their resilience. The United States Marine Corps was particularly interested. They were looking for a way to conduct large-scale amphibious assaults. They had been experimenting with various landing craft designs. None of them fully satisfied their needs. The existing models were often too slow. They were too difficult to maneuver. They were impossible to unload quickly. A delegation from the Marine Corps was sent to New Orleans to observe the Higgins Eureka boat. They watched in amazement as the boat easily ran itself onto a muddy bank. It stayed perfectly upright. It did not damage its vital parts. The Marines immediately realized the Eureka boat was exactly what they needed. It was the perfect hull design for a landing craft. However, the original Eureka boat made soldiers climb over the side to disembark. This exposed the men to enemy fire for too long. This was a critical flaw for combat. The Marines asked Higgins if he could modify the bow, or the front, to allow for faster unloading. Higgins' team made the key change. They added a large, simple ramp at the front. This ramp would drop down directly onto the beach. This allowed men and equipment to exit quickly and safely. This single, simple modification turned a swamp boat into a tool of global conquest. It was the Eureka moment for the entire Allied invasion plan. The landing craft, vehicle, personnel, or LCVP, was born. It was an accidental hero of the war. The LCVP, or landing craft, vehicle, personnel, was a marvel of functional design. Its official dimensions were surprisingly small for a vessel that carried so much historical weight. It was approximately 36 feet 3 inches long, 11 meters, and just over 10 feet 10 inches wide, 3.3 meters. Its loaded displacement was about 33,000 pounds, 15 tons. The design prioritized availability and production speed above all else. The boat's hull was constructed primarily of plywood. This choice was crucial. Plywood was readily available. It was easy to work with. It did not require the extensive use of steel, a material desperately needed for battleships and tanks. The use of wood also made the LCVP lighter. It meant the boat was less vulnerable to magnetic mines. The operational heart of the LCVP was its propulsion. Most early and common models were powered by a single gray marine diesel engine or a Holscott gasoline engine. The diesel engine was preferred because it minimized the risk of explosions from fuel vapors, which was a constant danger during crowded landings. These engines were capable of pushing the loaded craft to a maximum speed of about 12 knots, 22 kilometers per hour. This speed was essential for maintaining tight schedules during the critical phases of the landing. The true genius of the LCVP was its draft. When loaded with men and gear, the boat only drew about 3 feet of water at the stern. At the bow, it drew only about 2 feet. This extreme shallow draft meant the boat could approach and beach itself on virtually any stretch of coast. It could go much farther toward the dry sand than any standard naval vessel. The boat was protected, but minimally. The hull was low-sided. The main protection for the men came from 2 armored side ramps near the bow. These small sections were shielded with steel plating. They protected the crew and the soldiers from small arms fire as they approached the shore. However, the LCVP was completely exposed from above. The overall appearance was boxy and utilitarian. It lacked any curves or elegance. It was a tool of war built entirely for a single, brutal task, delivering fighting men and supplies onto enemy-held ground quickly and efficiently. The defining feature of the LCVP was the drop-down ramp at the bow. This simple, hinged plate of armor completely changed the nature of amphibious assault. Prior to the Higgins Boat, landing troops involved climbing over the high sides of a boat. Soldiers had to use nets, ladders, or jump into deep water. This process was slow. It was disorganized. It exposed the men to enemy fire for a dangerously long time. Andrew Higgins and his engineers solved this problem with pure functionality. They designed a ramp that was raised and lowered by a simple system of cables and a hand-operated winch at the front of the craft. When the boat ran ashore, the winch operator, often a member of the small 4-man crew, would rapidly lower the ramp. The ramp, typically constructed of steel plating for better protection and durability, created a sudden, direct, and stable walkway. This innovation provided 3 critical tactical advantages. The entire process of unloading 36 armed soldiers was reduced from minutes of chaotic climbing to mere seconds of sprinting. This speed was vital on the deadly beaches, minimizing the time the troops were exposed and massed together as a vulnerable target. The ramp was wide and strong enough to support the weight of light vehicles. This meant that the LCVP could deliver a jeep and its crew, or a small anti-tank gun, directly onto the beach. This immediately gave the landing force mobility and heavier support firepower, which was impossible with earlier craft. Once the cargo or personnel were ashore, the ramp was winched back up. The flat-bottom hull and powerful engine allowed the LCVP to quickly reverse off the beach. It could then immediately return to the transport ship for another load. This ensured a continuous, rapid shuttle service to sustain the attack. The ramp was also a psychological tool. The high sides of the hull protected the troops during the rough and terrifying approach. The lowered ramp served as a visual signal. It marked the moment of commitment. It told the soldier, "Go now, go fast, and do not look back." The Navy's official designation, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, simply described its function. But it was the drop-down ramp, a feature so obvious and yet so revolutionary, that turned a swamp boat into a military weapon capable of launching the largest invasion in human history. The success of the Higgins Boat was not just in its design. It was in the astonishing ability to build enough of them. General Dwight D. Eisenhower famously stated that Andrew Higgins was the man who won the war for us. This high praise was earned not on the battlefield, but on the factory floor. Higgins Industries, based in New Orleans, became the primary assembly line for invasion. The company rapidly scaled up production to a speed and scale that astonished the world. The final numbers are staggering. By the end of the Second World War, Higgins Industries had constructed nearly 23,000 vessels. The majority of these were the LCVP. They also produced various other essential craft, including larger LCTs, landing craft, tank, and smaller LCMs, landing craft, mechanized. The sheer volume meant that by 1944, a new Higgins boat was rolling off the production line every few hours. This immense output was a direct strategic weapon. It meant that whenever a landing craft was lost to enemy fire, to mines, or to bad weather, a constant reality of amphibious warfare, a replacement was already built and ready. This industrial resilience allowed the Allies to absorb horrific losses and still maintain the invasion timetable. Andrew Higgins was a demanding employer, but he was also progressive. He understood that to achieve this unprecedented production speed, he needed to utilize the entire labor pool. Higgins Industries became famous for its diverse workforce. The company hired thousands of women, known as the Higgins Belles, who worked alongside African Americans and Native Americans. This was at a time when racial and gender segregation was still the norm across the American South. Higgins did not hire based on social status. He hired based on skill and the willingness to work hard. He famously confronted union and government officials who tried to block his hiring practices. He ensured his workers received excellent pay and benefits. This inclusive environment fostered tremendous loyalty. The diverse workforce delivered the speed and quality necessary to meet the demands of the war machine. The shipyard in New Orleans, far from the battlefront, was a critical factor in the Allied victory. The Higgins boat was the final product, but the true accomplishment was the factory itself. It was a testament to American manufacturing power. This power converted raw materials into the essential tools needed to transport the fighting men and material across the world's oceans and onto enemy shores. The Higgins boat wasn't just a machine. It was a lifeline, and it depended on a crew of only 4 men. These were the unsung heroes of every amphibious landing. Under fire, in rough seas, in moments where seconds meant life or death, their teamwork decided whether troops reached the shore alive. Their crew roles were simple in number, but enormous in responsibility. He was the captain of the boat, usually a young enlisted man carrying the weight of dozens of lives. Standing at the stern, he steered through chaotic surf, floating mines, underwater obstacles, and the wreckage of other landing craft. His most critical moment came during the final approach. He had to hit the beach at exactly the right angle and with enough speed to prevent the boat from turning sideways under fire. And the moment the ramp dropped, he had to slam the engine in reverse, dragging the boat back into the water to make another run. He kept the gray marine diesel engine alive. In an invasion, one engine failure didn't just mean a delay, it meant a stranded craft under enemy guns. Working in tight, sweltering conditions, he monitored fuel, cooling, and power output. During the first days of a landing, LCVPs ran almost non-stop, often without any chance for proper maintenance. His quick hands and constant awareness kept the boat moving. 2 men stood at the stern, each behind a .30 caliber Browning machine gun. Their job was simple but deadly serious: protect the boat and the men inside it. They scanned the sky for enemy aircraft, watched the waves for fast attack craft, and laid down covering fire as the LCVP neared the beach. In those final seconds before the soldiers rushed onto the sand, the gunners created a life-saving shield of suppressive fire. These 4 men, the coxswain, the engineer, and the 2 gunners, operated like a single heartbeat. Their world was a plywood hull, an engine, and the screaming chaos around them. They repeated the run from ship to shore, and back again, dozens of times. They were the bridge between the Navy and the fighting troops. And without them, no landing would have been possible. Before the LCVP, naval planners considered large-scale beach assaults nearly impossible. The process was too slow. It was too risky. The simple design of the LCVP provided the key to solving this tactical problem. Its characteristics enabled a highly coordinated, multi-wave assault plan. This plan became the standard beachhead blueprint. The entire operation began far offshore. Troops transferred from large transport ships, such as LSDs or troop carriers, into the smaller Higgins boats. The LCVP capacity to carry exactly 36 combat-ready soldiers was crucial for this organization. It allowed platoons to be kept together. The landings were executed in tight waves. Each wave had a specific purpose. The first waves were purely assault troops. They were tasked with securing the immediate beach area. These first boats had to hit the beach almost simultaneously. The speed of the drop-down ramp ensured that the soldiers were not pinned down for long. The second waves followed immediately. They often carried specialized equipment. This included engineers with demolition charges. It included crew-served heavy weapons. The third and subsequent waves brought in vehicles and heavy supplies. The flat-bottomed design of the Higgins boat was essential here. It allowed the delivery of light artillery, jeeps, and command vehicles. This rapid injection of mechanized support was critical for pushing the attack inland. The LCVP's ability to quickly retract and return to the transport ships meant the flow of material never stopped. The boats formed a continuous logistics chain. This chain maintained the momentum of the attack. The military learned a powerful lesson. The success of an invasion was not defined by how many men landed. It was defined by how quickly the men and their supporting equipment could be put ashore. The Higgins boat was the tool that made speed and continuous flow possible. It transformed the concept of invasion from a desperate gamble into a calculated, organized operation. The LCVP was valued above all for its versatile cargo capacity. Its ability to handle diverse loads, from combat engineers to heavy supplies, made it the universal workhorse of the invasion fleet. The most common load was, of course, the fighting man. The Higgins boat was perfectly sized to carry a full infantry platoon or a large segment of one. Specifically, it could transport 36 fully equipped combat soldiers. This standardization simplified all planning. It allowed commanders to calculate exactly how many boats were needed for a battalion or a regiment. However, the boat's utility extended far beyond just moving troops. The LCVP had a maximum cargo capacity of 8,000 pounds, or approximately 3.6 metric tons. This made it an essential vehicle transporter. The boat's flat bottom and wide ramp meant it could carry crucial light vehicles. It could easily carry one jeep and up to 12 additional troops. The jeep, though small, was vital for command and reconnaissance. Getting the jeeps ashore in the first hour of the landing was essential for establishing forward command posts and rapidly distributing orders. Alternatively, the LCVP could transport one piece of light artillery. This usually included a 75 mm pack howitzer or a small anti-tank gun. These weapons provided the initial heavy fire support against enemy bunkers and fortified positions. Without the LCVP, these weapons would have taken hours to land. For the sustained phase of the battle, the Higgins boat became a moving warehouse. It was constantly delivering essential supplies. These included fuel in drums, water, medical kits, and thousands of boxes of ammunition. These supplies often traveled loose on the deck. They were protected only by the boat's low sides. The capacity to switch seamlessly between delivering troops, vehicles, and essential material gave the Allied command unmatched flexibility. The LCVP was the single point of failure and the ultimate tool of success. It ensured that the firepower and logistics chain, forged in American factories, were physically extended onto the enemy's beachhead. The Higgins boat was not tested first on the beaches of Normandy. Its first massive wartime deployment came a year and a half earlier. This was Operation Torch in November 1942. Operation Torch was the Allied invasion of North Africa. The objective was to land on the coasts of Morocco and Algeria. These territories were held by Vichy French forces. This operation was the first major American amphibious landing of the war. It was the crucial first test for the LCVP under fire. Thousands of Higgins boats were lowered from transport ships. They delivered tens of thousands of American soldiers onto the shore. This was a decisive trial for the new Amphibious doctrine. The operation had many successes. The LCVP proved it could operate effectively in the open sea. They successfully negotiated significant waves. Their ability to approach the shoreline was confirmed. They quickly disembarked the troops. However, the operation also revealed significant problems. The first problem concerned navigation. In the darkness and chaos, the landing craft often became confused. They landed troops on the wrong sections of the beach. This led to tactical confusion and delays in the schedule. The second problem was related to weather conditions. The North African coast experienced heavy surf and tides. Many LCVPs were cast ashore by storms. Others were smashed by waves against the sand. This resulted in heavy losses of equipment. Many boats were damaged. Their wooden hulls were rugged. But they were not unbreakable. Despite these losses, Operation Torch confirmed one thing. The core concept of the Higgins boat was correct. No other small boat could have sustained such a logistical attack. The experience gained in North Africa was invaluable. It taught the LCVP crews how to better manage the tides and the surf. It prepared the Navy for the much larger challenges ahead in the Pacific and Normandy. Operation Torch was the baptism by fire for the small, yet historically vital, landing craft. While the LCVP faced the tides and mud of the Atlantic, it confronted an entirely different set of challenges in the vast Pacific theater. The campaign known as island hopping relied entirely on the Higgins Boat to move troops across unforgiving distances and onto impossible shores. The Japanese island defenses were often built with deep water access in mind. However, the true obstacle was frequently natural. Many Pacific islands are surrounded by vast, razor-sharp coral reefs. These reefs were the enemy of every landing craft. They sat just below the surface, often a few hundred yards offshore. If a conventional boat hit a reef, its keel would be ripped out. If an LCVP hit a reef, it risked being impaled, trapping the troops hundreds of yards from the beach. The flat-bottomed design of the Higgins boat provided some advantage. It allowed the crew to navigate extremely shallow water. But even the LCVP could not simply glide over the toughest coral. The soldiers and sailors quickly developed new tactics. During operations like the brutal landing at Tarawa, some LCVPs became trapped. The troops were forced to abandon the boats hundreds of yards from the beach, wading through fire in neck-deep water. This disaster underscored the critical need for better intelligence and better tools. The solution wasn't a new boat, it was more LCVPs used alongside specialized craft. Larger vessels would use the Higgins boats as the final shuttle. The abundance of the craft meant commanders could accept heavy losses. The LCVP also faced the extreme distance and rapid climate changes of the Pacific. Unlike the organized, mass landings in Europe, the Pacific operations often involved moving small numbers of troops over hundreds of miles. The Higgins boat was robust enough to handle these rough, long-distance journeys. The LCVP was the unsung hero of the island hopping campaign. It was the only vessel tough enough and numerous enough to handle the sheer logistical challenge of transferring the fighting man from the sea onto the coral, mud, and sand of the Japanese strongholds. The simple boat provided the relentless, essential link that broke the defensive perimeter of the Japanese Empire, one small island at a time. The planning for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, was the greatest logistical undertaking in history. At the center of this massive plan was the small Higgins boat. General Eisenhower knew that the entire invasion would fail without the reliable, continuous service of the LCVP fleet. On June 6, 1944, thousands of LCVPs were deployed. They were responsible for carrying the first waves of assault troops onto all 5 landing beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The role of the Higgins boat was most dramatically illustrated at Omaha Beach. Here, the German defenses were far stronger than anticipated. The relentless crossfire quickly turned the beach into a killing zone. As the LCVPs neared the shore, many were disabled by heavy artillery and mortar fire. However, the boats that made it through saved lives simply by their design. The drop-down ramp allowed soldiers to immediately gain forward momentum. They were able to rush off the bow and reach the slight protection of the shingle beach in seconds. In this absolute chaos, the LCVP became an improvised ambulance. After delivering their troops, many coxswains chose not to immediately return to the transport ships. Instead, they navigated the gauntlet of fire to pick up the wounded. The flat deck and the forward ramp made it relatively easy to load casualties for evacuation back to the offshore hospital ships. The sheer scale of the LCVP presence at Normandy was astounding. The boats were deployed in a meticulously timed operation. They delivered the essential foundation for the Allied victory. Over the first few days, the Higgins boats constantly shuttled back and forth. They transported not just men, but also vital heavy equipment. They carried artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, communications gear, and the massive amounts of ammunition needed to sustain the fighting inland. The LCVP was the only craft numerous enough and versatile enough to maintain this relentless flow. Its success at Normandy confirmed General Eisenhower's estimation. The boat designed in the Louisiana bayous was, in fact, the essential component that anchored the success of the entire Operation Overlord. Once the assault waves hit the beaches, the work of the Higgins boat was far from over. Its most vital function was not the glory of the initial landing. It was the essential task of logistics and evacuation. A secured beachhead is a place of constant, desperate need. Soldiers rapidly consume ammunition. They require fresh water and urgent medical supplies. The LCVP became a relentless supply line. It made continuous shuttle runs between the anchored transport ships and the fortified shore. The boats delivered everything necessary to sustain the offensive. They carried drums of gasoline. They supplied mines and artillery shells. Their capacity to carry up to 8,000 pounds ensured that these critical resources arrived quickly. An image of supplies and ammunition being unloaded from a landing craft onto the shore. This phase of logistics was extremely dangerous. The LCVP crews continued to operate under artillery fire and air attacks. They carried their vital cargo directly to the front line. They endured fire to ensure the infantry received their critical resupply. On the return trip, the Higgins boat transformed into an improvised evacuation vessel. After unloading the supplies, the crews took on wounded soldiers. This was a challenging and urgent task. The drop-down ramp of the LCVP, which allowed troops to sprint out, also allowed for the quick loading of stretchers. The boats carrying the wounded sped back to offshore hospital ships or larger vessels equipped with medical facilities. This capability for rapid evacuation dramatically improved the survival rate for thousands of soldiers. The LCVP was indispensable because it could operate where larger ships could not. In this dual role, as a provider of life-saving resources and a carrier of the wounded, the Higgins boat served as the bridge between the fleet and the ground forces. It ensured that the beachhead was not just captured, but successfully held. Most mass-produced weapons of World War II were quickly declared obsolete by 1945. They were replaced by jet technology and new materials. The Higgins boat was a major exception. Its simple, effective design ensured it remained an essential part of the global military arsenal for decades. The design of the LCVP did not require complex technology. It used a flat, plywood hull and a diesel engine. This simplicity meant that the boat was incredibly easy to maintain and repair. It did not rely on specialized parts that became scarce after the war ended. As a result, the Higgins boat was not retired. Instead, it was adopted by numerous navies around the world. It was used extensively by the French Navy during their conflicts in Indochina in the 1950s. The United States military continued to use the LCVP in major subsequent conflicts. It was a key component of landings during the Korean War. Its dependable design made it the default choice for quick deployment. The Higgins boat found a second life in the complex riverine warfare of Vietnam. The shallow, marshy environment of the Mekong Delta was almost identical to the Louisiana bayous where the boat was first conceived. The LCVP was perfectly suited for navigating these treacherous inland waterways. In Vietnam, the boats were often modified. They were fitted with steel armor plating for better protection against ambush fire. They were adapted to serve as river patrol boats, troop transports, and mobile medical aid stations. This incredible longevity proved the genius of Andrew Higgins' original concept. His boat was not an advanced piece of military equipment. It was a perfect, robust tool. It was built to solve a problem, moving people and cargo in shallow water. That problem remained constant, regardless of the enemy or the decade. The fact that a wooden boat, designed in the 1930s, could still be relied upon in the jungles and rivers of the 1970s is a powerful testament to its fundamental engineering superiority. The fame of the Higgins boat belongs to Andrew Higgins and the men who steered them onto the beaches. But the sheer volume of production, the thousands of boats required, was a victory won by the workers at home. Higgins Industries in New Orleans was a critical example of American wartime mobilization. The company faced massive quotas. To meet them, Higgins had to recruit a workforce unlike almost any other in the segregated American South. Higgins consciously chose a path of inclusion. He recruited thousands of new workers who had previously been excluded from high-paying industrial jobs. He hired vast numbers of women. They quickly became experts at welding, carpentry, and assembly. They were affectionately nicknamed the Higgins Bells. They worked long, demanding shifts to ensure the necessary speed of production. Crucially, Higgins also hired thousands of African American workers and Native Americans. At a time of deep racial division, his shipyards were integrated. Higgins famously stated that he needed the best workers, regardless of race, to build the boats that would save the world. This commitment to equal opportunity ensured that the best talent was put to work. It set a precedent for future industrial practices. The workers felt a deep connection to the war effort. They were not just building boats. They were building the very vessels that carried their brothers, sons, and neighbors into battle. They worked with intense speed and care. They understood that every rivet and every plank of plywood represented a life on the beachhead. The vast majority of the 23,000 vessels built were crafted by this diverse, dedicated, and highly motivated workforce. Their relentless effort was the true backbone of the invasion fleet. Without their skill and their sheer numbers, the LCVP would have remained a brilliant prototype, not a global force. The legacy of the Higgins boat is therefore shared. It belongs to the genius of the designer, the courage of the crew, and the patriotic labor of the diverse men and women of New Orleans. They were the unsung heroes whose hands built the vessels that changed the course of the war. The Higgins boat was officially retired from U.S. military service decades ago. Yet, its simple design principles remain the foundation of all modern amphibious warfare. Military designers never abandoned the core concept of the LCVP. The crucial elements, the flat deck, the shallow draft, and the forward drop-down ramp, are still mandatory features. The immediate successor to the LCVP was the LCU, or Landing Craft Utility. The LCU is much larger. It can carry main battle tanks and significantly more cargo. But it operates on the exact same premise, running itself onto the beach for rapid, direct unloading. The greatest technological descendant is the LCAC, the Landing Craft Air Cushion. The LCAC is a high-speed craft that rides on a cushion of air. It can glide over water, sand, ice, and even coral reefs. This technology is a direct answer to the limitations faced by the LCVP in the Pacific. It carries heavy tanks and speeds them to the shore. However, even the futuristic LCAC uses the fundamental logic of the Higgins boat. It relies on a large ramp at the front to quickly project force and supplies onto the land. The LCVP solved a problem that had plagued military strategists for centuries: how to get a large army from a ship to a hostile shore. Andrew Higgins' simple, pragmatic design broke the geographical barrier. He showed the world that industrial might could be translated directly into tactical advantage. Today, every major navy operates some form of landing craft. Each one owes its existence to that humble wooden boat from Louisiana. The Higgins boat didn't just win the war. It permanently rewrote the rules of military strategy. It is remembered as the boat that was always there. It was always ready. It was always essential. It remains the craft that truly won the war.